Okay, without further ado, as Ann mentioned, we're going to talk about those three pillars that the board wants to have as priorities for 2021. And so first up, we're going to have the opportunity to hear from Marshall Clement. Marshall is the Deputy Director for Policy and Strategic Planning for the Council of State Government. Over his 13-year career with the Justice Center, he has led numerous projects in many of our states that have all led to a lot of very positive changes and impacts to our systems. One of the kind of, I guess, most important things I think about Marshall is his ability to listen. You know, there are times when something will come up data-wise that may not look like it is helping us, I guess is a good way of saying it. And Marshall's just proven time and time again to be someone that we can call, beat up on, and try to learn more of where they're coming from. And we really just appreciate his ability to listen to our members. And so with that, Marshall, I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Kevin. Thanks, Director. It's great to be with all of you. We're honored to work with CLA and support all of you in these efforts, and thrilled about the priorities that the board has lifted up, in particular, you know, areas that we're working on with you all around data transparency and supervision success. So we'll certainly talk about those here with you today. Just recognizing that you all have so much going on with legislative sessions, facing historic budgetary uncertainty, a still raging pandemic, new challenges by the day, be it from the weather or otherwise. We're in awe of your tireless leadership, and want to do everything we can to support you in these challenging times. So today I'm really excited to talk about three partnerships where we've been really honored to partner with CLA and you all. And as Kevin and the director said, really listen to you and get your feedback about these efforts. All three are still in their early stages in many ways. All three really rely on and will only be successful if they are both helpful to you and there are priorities for you. And so again, we want this to be as much a conversation during this session as possible. The number of slides is very minimal, and we'll bounce back and forth between slides and this overall video session to be able to hopefully foster a lot of discussion. We're looking for your ideas, your suggestions, certainly your questions. We want to use the chat to get folks talking and get the conversation going as best we can in this virtual format. And so I'll start the presentation here. Can everyone see that okay? Thumbs up? Okay, great. So the three topics we want to talk about during our session today is first efforts that I know you all have been working on individually and as an association to make criminal justice data, particularly corrections data, more usable, more accessible and more usable to the public, to policymakers. Certainly over the last year, if it's taught us anything, you know, the speed with which directors around the country, you all got data collected on COVID infections and got that data up in a real-time fashion on websites to make everyone be able to see what was happening and provide that kind of transparency was unprecedented, I think, in terms of how quickly corrections agencies responded and made that kind of data available. And so we're going to talk about how those kinds of efforts, those kinds of directions can be expanded. The second is around collecting data on revocations. Together with you all, we published the first ever data on how much revocations from probation and parole are impacting prison admissions. 45% of all prison admissions are coming from probation and parole, either for new crimes or for technical violations. And we're eager to continue working with you all to track those trends and see where states are seeing improvement on those metrics. And the third is how we can develop policy solutions and ways states can get some free assistance right now through a number of different efforts to tackle these issues and work with them. So we'll start with Justice Counts, which is a new effort by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. I believe we have some representatives on the line with us today. This is the brainchild of leaders at BJA who really saw the opportunity and need to support the adoption of better criminal justice data from crime and arrest all the way through parole. The primary tagline here is that safety and justice deserve better data. When it comes to unemployment, we get monthly numbers, right? On days after the month's close from the Department of Labor about who's unemployed, what industries are seeing increases or decreases, and what those numbers look like state by state. When it comes to criminal justice data, all too often the data we do have is stale. We're looking at data from 1 or 2 years ago. It's disjointed. If you're a state lawmaker trying to get a sense, either as a governor or as a public safety chair, about the state of your criminal justice system, you have to consult reports from a myriad of agencies across all 3 branches of government and try to stitch them together to understand the scope and trends across your system. And so Justice Counts is a truly unprecedented coalition of state and local leaders working to make criminal justice data more accessible and useful with common metrics implemented across all 50 states. It's a big project, multi-year effort, multi-million-dollar effort, and we're really thrilled to be partnered with CLA and over 20 other both membership associations representing everyone from chiefs of police through probation and parole, governors, legislators, the courts, as well as national experts such as RAND, Measures for Justice, UCCI, and others. This is a big coalition working together to all under the same goal that safety and justice deserve better data. So what does that look like? How are we actually going to make that happen? We're thankful to Dr. Beth Skinner from Iowa, who's representing corrections on the National Steering Committee, which is a kind of Noah's Ark of the criminal justice system with police chiefs, sheriffs, corrections, probation, parole, legislators, governors, policy advisors. It's chaired by Justice Michael Boggs from the state of Georgia. And that group will really be guiding this effort over the next couple of years. I'll ask Dr. Skinner to speak in a minute about why this effort is so important to her. There are 4 big deliverables that we're trying to deliver for BJ here. The first is to make state data that already is collected, analyzed, and reported more publicly available. We know that across all your agencies, you are collecting, analyzing, and getting monthly, if not weekly or daily reports about who's incarcerated, who's in your facilities, who's under supervision, who's being admitted, who's being released, right? That is your core to your business. But all too often, that data isn't publicly available. We want to be talking with you about how we can help eliminate some of the barriers to making that data more public. The second is to develop a consensus around what kinds of criminal justice metrics are most important, and that consensus is reached not just within each individual silo or agency of the criminal justice system, but really across the justice system, because BJ is interested in looking at how governors, state policymakers, and those leading agencies get the right and best information to improve the justice system's operations. So we need input from governors, from legislators, from the judiciary, from other stakeholders that you interact with about what kinds of metrics are going to be most important for you. We're going to take lessons learned from past efforts that have developed performance measures. We know this can spiral into a process that leads to hundreds, if not thousands, of metrics that will never be collected. And that is not our goal. We are looking to develop consensus around a baseline set of core metrics that every state can collect and be able to look across the country and see how trends are changing. The third part of this project is to develop resources and tools for government that states need support in adopting these metrics and making this data public, and we're eager to work with BJ to provide that kind of support to the states. And finally, to lead a national campaign to really lift up the importance of this issue for governors, legislators, state budget officers, that if we're going to get better data, we're going to have to invest in that capacity, and that's work that is important in order to improve safety and justice. So I want to ask a couple of things, one in the chat, but also turn it over to Dr. Skinner to talk about the project thus far in the steering committee meetings. But while she's chatting, if you could mention that in the chat for both current directors as well as former directors, what are the 1 to 2 data metrics that your governor or legislators are most often requesting from you? What are they? What's just the top line? And it might be impacted by COVID this year, but but what are the 1 or 2 metrics that they're most often looking for you to report on, most interested in knowing about your corrections agencies? If you could just add to the chat some of the things that you're seeing there, that'd be great. Wonderful. So Dr. Skinner, could you talk about, I go back and forth between Dr. Skinner and Director Skinner.
You just call me Beth. How about that?
So we might as well let everyone know that we actually used to work together. Used to work at the Justice Center.
Yes.
Full disclosure. So I'm gonna still call you. I can't get help but call you Dr. Skinner.
I've been called worse. Trust me.
Can you speak about, I was really just leapfrogged, so many on so many fronts in terms of data becoming more available. Can you talk about how that's gone and how it's helping you kind of become more effective and efficient?
Yes. And first of all, thank you, Marshall, for allowing me to talk about what we're doing in Iowa, as well as being part of the steering committee. We have, just as Kevin said, there's a bunch of rock stars on this Zoom meeting. There's a lot of rock stars on the Justice Counts steering committee. And I do want to hold Kevin and some others accountable before I start, is that I've been in this position now for 2 years and no one told me that I was going to age in dog years in this position. So thank you for not telling me that that was going to happen. So anyway, appreciate the insight on that. Anyway, as many before I was a director, I was a research director. So data is kind of my jam, something that's near and dear to me. And I think for the longest time, I've been working in corrections in different capacities for the past 20 years. And one thing I have learned through this process, especially around data, there is no consistent data reporting across the country, across the states. Like, I don't think we can go to any of our websites and find the same data and report it in the same way, in a consistent way, whether it be monthly, quarterly, yearly. And I think our policymakers need to know what's happening. They're the ones that are holding the purse strings to a certain extent, and they want to know how we're doing. And that by having data readily available, they can learn about our population. They can learn about releases, admissions, revocations, recidivism. We all know that's always been kind of a thorn in the side for corrections for many years, right? Is that no one measures recidivism the same. Some do, but it's hard to do state comparisons. But we also want to be able to show our policymakers and the governor's office and our constituents, are we moving the needle? And I think having a steering committee and having consistent metrics will get us there. So I want to give you an example, and many of you have probably already been through this already in your legislative session, but we had our budget session. So we had our budget Justice Appropriations Committee 2 days ago. I'm kind of like, one of those kind of, major humps you have to get over during the session is meet with legislators and talk about your budget and your population. I will tell you from experience, this is the second time that I've done this, is that we use a lot of data during this presentation to back everything up we asked for. We gave them the bigger picture of our admissions, our releases, our revocations, and recidivism. And in doing that, I believe having good metrics means there's a lot less questions that were asked for the first time in a long time. I think it's transparency, which is really important. They know how we're using our data to drive resource-based decisions. And I think that builds confidence with our governor, with our governor's staff and with policymakers. And I also think it enhances our credibility. We're not hiding anything. I'm sharing this information to the group. It's on our website as well. And then what I think, and Marshall and I talked about this before, is then people don't fill in the gaps, right? And I think, unfortunately, sometimes people think corrections or criminal justice agencies, law enforcement, whatever that may be, are hiding things by not sharing numbers. So I think it also enhances our credibility, and people don't fill in the gaps in terms of what they think our numbers look like. Finally, a question that always comes in all my meetings when I meet with other policymakers or the governor's office, they ask, what are other states doing? How do we measure up to other states? And that information is not readily available. I mean, it is in some states it is, but a lot of people like to compare, what's going on in other states. How do we compare against them? If we don't have consistent metrics or ways, to track that, it's hard for for us to go out and look what other states, surrounding states are similar to us are doing and how they're doing, and what we could be doing better. And I think it's just really, it's also a very efficient way as well. By us having the data up on our website, is that in across, consistent measures across other states, it's efficient because we get a lot more phone calls if we didn't have that data readily available to the public outward facing. And the final thing I just want to say is that in terms of building a robust data system, we know it's not a flip of the switch. We know I see the old director, John Baldwin from Corrections here, from Iowa Department of Corrections, want to give him a shout out, was very integral in terms of building our data system, our ICON system, which is, in terms of getting to the point we want to be in terms of have a very robust data system, we have to have building blocks, and it doesn't happen overnight. I think we have to assess our systems to see where we're at and what we need to do and have a longer term plan so we can use data in a way that helps us be more, data driven, more transparent, more accountable. And so I really think, and just kind of tying this up because I don't want to take up too much time of Marshall's time, is that I just think this is a great initiative. I think this is where the field needs to go to have consistent measures across each state so we can, compare, contrast, and have that type of transparency. So that is if anyone has any questions, let me know, but that's kind of in a nutshell, kind of my feelings about the importance of data and transparency.
Thanks so much, Dr. Skinner. I think the couple of things you lifted up, I just want to build on in the conversation and see if others want to weigh in on. One is this value of consistency and whether or not comparability is something we should be striving for. I think on the one hand, ideally, yes, everyone would love to be able to compare states on common metrics. On the other hand, you all know and are often we're talking about the challenges with doing that. And I see Commissioner Michi mentioning, it's got to be like states, right, that you're comparing to. On the other hand, we know from our work with so many of you through Justice Reinvestment, even similarly sized states and similar regions often will have very different sentencing and corrections architectures that really change who's even considered a felony offense, that can change where those people are held, what's considered in and out of the jurisdictional versus custodial population, for example. And so it gets really diced really fast to get a true apples to apples comparison. At the same time, I think that we see a lot of promise and potential if we don't try to get too specific in detailing exactly the same types of comparisons, that there are still trends, whether you're considering your prison population to be defined as this or that, if it's going up in one place and going down another, there's something of note there to look into and be aware of. And so one just thing that we wanted to kind of put out there, because it's a tension that I think we'll be wrestling with throughout this project as we move forward and update you and continue to get your advice about it. And again, Dr. Skinner's on that steering committee and can help champion the voice of corrections. There'll also be a subcommittee. Is if we make these definitions of these metrics too precise, right, it'll be harder for more and more states to adopt them without a lot of changes to data systems or a lot more analysis capacity. And on the other hand, if we go too broad and don't do enough to define these metrics, right, comparability will be just impossible by any means. And so we're going to try to work with all the stakeholders to really find that right balance, that we want things that are as comparable as possible, while at the same time we want data now. We don't want to this to be a project that's going to require tens of millions of dollars in 10 years before states can really report out data in a useful way. And so along those lines, states are in very different places when it comes to what they can report. And what we started to test with this project while we're developing the metrics is to say, well, what is the state of what criminal justice agencies report when it comes to data publicly? So we've noticed over the years that more and more of your agencies in your states are putting out monthly indicators reports or monthly data on your websites across a range of metrics, many of which that you've listed here as being kind of the most important metrics. And so we, based on what was in those reports and what we saw as the most common kind of basic population data points, we scoured all 50 websites, all 50 states, publicly available data with our partners at Recidivist to tally up who's making data available on a monthly, quarterly, annually basis, or currently not really at all. We also looked at how fresh that data is, how recently updated was that data that states are reporting. So I want to share with you some of the results and really ask you all to help us understand what are the barriers to making data that we're certain you have internally reported to you on a monthly or more frequent basis. What barriers exist to make that data public, and how might we be able to work with you all to help do that? So here are the 7 kind of basic data points we looked for as we looked across states: prison population, prison admission, prison releases, probation and parole populations, and probation and parole revocations or returns to prison. And so you can see here when it comes to prison population, everyone's reporting data on a monthly, a quarterly, or annually basis, right? 32 states reporting data on prison populations monthly. But when we get into prison admissions, releases, the reasons why those populations might be going up or down, fewer states are able to currently at least make data publicly available on a monthly basis to really understand trends. And this is, really important right now as we see so much disruption and shifts across prison populations and admissions trends in light of the impact of the pandemic. And so one question we wanted to ask you all is what are the barriers to making more of your data that, again, we're certain is available monthly internally to your agency? What are some barriers or hesitations or concerns with trying to make more of that public? So that I wanted to ask Director Precythe, who I know we've been talking about this with, and others to weigh in. Any feedback, advice for you about what we could be doing to help you all increase the number of states that make these data publicly available?
So Marshall, I'll go ahead and start. And I think that a lot of it has to do with those of us in these roles and really understanding what transparency means and the value of sharing the data. Listening to Beth, director, doctor, whatever, Beth, listening to her talk about value in it really just pumps me up even more. And so when I look at the state of Missouri, we're not one of those that puts it out there regularly. And that's a couple of things. One, when I got here, corrections was a bad name at the Capitol. And so we've had to work very hard to get our reputation in a good place. We've gotten there. Now it's time to start sharing data. The Capitol, the people there, they weren't ready to understand anything about data. And the other thing is, in this state, they didn't really view data as being important and didn't make decisions based on data like we do today. And I think it's a shift in mindset for some leaders. I think it's how capable is your research staff and the tools they have to use. I think that's a barrier in some places. But we are certainly progressing more into these common data elements. And then it makes the conversation about comparing states easier, because now they begin to understand what are the trends in your state and what is driving that. And even legislators, I always want to say, they just want to compare states, but they also know that our state doesn't operate in the exact same manner another state does. And I think that's our job to continue to reinforce that. But the more we can share these common points and begin to talk about them from a national level, I think the more we can help bring our legislators into today's world. The biggest scare is that they look at the numbers and they do the math and they say we can close a prison. That's the biggest scare. But I think then it goes to what's the relationship you have with your governor's office, your legislators, etc. So I just kind of throw that out there because I know we're working to share data, but we're not currently sharing it on a monthly basis.
And Director, and for others, please jump in. I mean, are we correct in just understanding like that as antiquated, and we know the data challenges are vast. Seeing the chat, right? Huge underinvestment by states, by legislatures in research capacity. We see states, right, with research departments and corrections being cut in tough budget times of past, and what does exist is often not sufficient to the opportunity and task and need to research and provide the kind of data that I think we would all love to see. But staffing issues and then antiquated data systems, and Director, not to call you out, but we worked closely with that 1980s mainframe system you've got, and doing the best we can with it. Are we correct? At the end of the day, for these kinds of metrics we were just talking about, populations and emissions and releases, is it right to assume that internally there's some kind of report? It may not look pretty, but there's some kind of report that you all are looking at or able to look at, on a real-time basis to understand those kinds of basic population trends?
Yeah, the data's there. The data's there, and it can be retrieved and shared. Again, I think it goes back to understanding what that data means to people and how we can share it. And, I'm looking at a lot of the comments, and I see Helen in New Hampshire saying having the staff. I can tell you, I didn't have the staff here in the state of Missouri. There were 2.5 people when I got here. Now we're a section of about 6 that do data analysis, and we've built a planning section. I mean, I'm just filling in gaps where they existed, and we've shifted the emphasis on what it was on to what it needs to be on, which is more of a planning and a data and an analysis standpoint of what's happening in the department, because that's how you change your practices based on what your data is telling you. And, data in, data out, what goes in comes out. So you got to have the whole quality assurance and quality control piece for how the data gets put into the system. So we have very similar barriers to what other people are doing, but I think it boils down to partly the focus that we as leaders are able to put on that, and then the resources that we can commit to those. It's hard, and it takes a long time to build those systems. But yeah, we're still using a 1980s I-series, but we're working to come off of it because we've committed money to it. So.
Hey, Marshall, I'm just going to jump in, Kevin, if that's okay. Does CSG track TPVs? I mean, even from the states where you are getting data in terms of, and how can we share that? Like, I didn't until you saw that, present another diagram, and you and I have talked like several times, I didn't even know that you were like tracking how data was being gathered or not, or being published across the states, right, and across the nation. I mean, one place to start, it seems to me, if you're tracking like even the amount of TPVs, Colorado has a high TPV, right? It's like half of our recidivism. It's a problem. It's dropped, by the way, as a result of COVID, like substantially dropped, which is a lesson there. And it's something I've gone after since I've gotten here. But if we can start to compare and contrast about what states are doing, I know that Ann and I've talked a lot about this, and some of the other directors around their TPV reduction efforts, right? Because, I mean, it's a problem in the country. And so if there's some way of even looking at that to go like, hey, how did that state go from this high rate down to this portion of rate? It would help perhaps start the conversation for those of us who identify that TPV is a problem. Maybe other states don't believe that, but we do. And I'm sure there's a number of us that do, because it drives a lot of our prison population. And quite frankly, we're not making the community any safer a lot of times because of TPVs.
That's great, Director. And I think both comments, you and Director Precythe, I mean, we're going to get to actually some efforts we're doing right now with you all to collect that data on violations and that result in prison admissions. And we'll share with some of the just the latest data we've gotten from you all for how those trends have fared in 2020 in just a minute. So I want to come back to that that comment around revocations as a key driver. But one of the things as we go forward, you know, and we think about looking, as you said, Director, about across all 50 states, what's the state of data? This is something we really want to get your ideas about how best to help make sure that this project can lift up the challenges for corrections in the same way that it's going to try to help sheriffs lift up challenges with jail data and law enforcement with crime and arrest data. And so one of the things I'm hearing, just to make sure, you know, I'm taking notes here. One is that, you know, infrastructure is a huge issue and the costs to fixing that are high, but they can't be ignored. And two, that staff to actually be able to make use of that data and analyze it and tell stories with it that are impactful and put things in context so that policymakers don't just have the data, but they know what to do with it, is also critically important to make sure that states have support around and resources for. And that third, you know, some common data metrics will be helpful, especially if they can not only set a baseline for what at minimum, you know, states should try to be able to collect and share on a 50-state basis, but also for those states that have the capability to dive more deeply in the reasons for revocations going up or down, as Commissioner Hanks is lifting up in the chat, you know, is also critically important to kind of sketch out what a more advanced set of metrics could look like for states that are able and ready to build towards that. So those are 3 notes I'm taking away. Any other final thoughts before we move on?
Hey, Marshall, one thing I would just throw in there, Helen made a great comment here at the end, and I feel like I want to give this plug because I came from a state in North Carolina that had a phenomenal information development system, and we were able to build everything we wanted directly, personally, with their help. Here in Missouri, we don't have that same capability. And so Helen's asking, she wants people to build these reports that can help her understand more about her probation and parole violation and reasons for revocation. We did that partnership with Recidiviz through the help of Council of State Governments with our Justice Reinvestment Initiative. And they have built us reports that our department would never have been able to commit the resources to or the capability to. So I'm just putting a plug out there that there are ways to tap into some of these resources out there to help you get the reports you need without you having to build them yourself. You be able to share the data with them. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there because I would have never known how to go about doing that here in the state of Missouri without the outside help of Recidiviz and Council of State Governments. I just think that's a really great point she brings.
Thanks, Director, and thanks, Commissioner. So let me turn to the last slide on this section, because that is a nice segue to how do we overcome some of these barriers in the short term as well as the long term. So you heard us mention a national campaign. We've got governors, legislators, state budget officers, you know, at the table in this Justice Counts coalition and initiative. And in the years to come, we'll be talking with them about how to make this a big priority at conferences of those members to lift up the needs that you're talking about here in terms of funding for infrastructure, staff capacity, et cetera. But as Dr. Precythe just mentioned, there are things you can do in the interim, and we've been working with some of you on these kinds of strategies, from working to take even mainframe data out of that into the cloud and manipulate it in ways to produce real-time reports through work that BJA has funded in Missouri under a project we call Lantern with Recidiviz. But through the Justice Counts initiative, you know, one of these, as we're scanning data, we're also collecting the data into a common place that you're reporting publicly on websites. And we want to work with you all to try to be helpful to make more data public. So if there are reports that you're already producing internally that you need help making public, we want to work with you to be able to make that data public on your own sites, as well as in a common repository. So we can bring it together with not only other states' corrections data, but also with other data from across your own state, whether it be crime arrest data, jail trends, et cetera. And so I want to share just a mock-up of what that might look like as we go forward. It's a little bit hard to see probably on your screen. It's a little small, but on the Justice Counts website, which has this funny little hyphen in the URL, right now it's not currently live, but in the coming weeks we'll be working with CLA and you all to share a private link to look at what data we have found on your publicly available websites and how we've tried to organize it in a way that's kind of offers a one-stop place to see what data is currently available across all 50 states, across these kind of common metrics. And so this can be one tool, we hope, that helps policymakers see kind of the state of what criminal justice data from crime all the way through corrections is currently publicly available and what's not available. But also where it is available, we want this to hopefully be a tool for you all to help make that data public and more visible. And we'll always be linking back to your state-specific website where you'll obviously always offer much more detail and rich data behind these kind of baseline top-line metrics. So this is one tool that we're working to build with CLA and Recidiviz to try to be helpful in making more of that existing data public. Please reach out to Stephen, myself, and we'll connect you with folks on our teams to make that happen. Currently, there's about a third of these metrics that are being reported publicly. We want to see what would it take. Could we actually try to get half or 2/3 of these metrics reported publicly by the end of the year? Really make some progress on this front in a way that's really hopefully a light lift. So next, I want to turn to this issue that Director Williams, you were raising about revocations. And our efforts with you all to collect data on revocations, since data about what share of prison admissions were coming from parole and probation is not data that's been publicly reported at a 50-state level before. And with your all's help, back in 2019, we published the first ever report titled Confined and Costly that showed that 45% of state prison admissions right nationwide were due to violations of probation and parole. We knew about parole from numbers that were reported through BJS, but we didn't know about the impact of probation, which is obviously a much larger population of people under supervision, their impact on prison admissions. And you can see here about half the violations were from probation, half from parole. Of those, about half were technical, half were new crime. And we know from working with many of you how nuanced and different and tough that distinction between new crime and technical is. We know from detailed analysis that it's never a black and white line, that people often have multiple violations, some for new crimes, some for technicals, and how that gets coded is sometimes not always accurate. And so we're really sensitive to just how fuzzy those numbers can be. But the broader impact is this, that for all the uncertainty facing prison population trends, this is a population that by and large is under the at least more immediate control or ability to impact for state policymakers, governors, and in many cases, as Director Priest mentioned, for you all as corrections directors. So the question, we had this data from 2019, which was collected in 2017 and 2018. But the question was, you all are taking steps every day to reduce recidivism, to improve supervision practices, to use risk assessment, to adopt evidence-based practice. What impact is it having? Are we starting to see those efforts collectively move these numbers in impactful ways? And so this data is not yet public, but we wanted to preview with it because it comes from you all. Our efforts to work with you all to collect data from what's happened to these populations from 2018 to 2019, pre-pandemic, and then from 2019 compared to 2020 data to really understand what impact the disruptions from the pandemic have had on new court commitments as well as probation and parole violation admissions, either for new crime or for technical violations. And so what you can see is there was significant progress being made in terms of reducing the number of violations from parole and especially probation in just the 1 year between 2018 and 2019. Even as new commitments remained virtually unchanged, you had the number of people from probation and parole dropped nationwide across these 39 states that provided data by almost 5%, which is a big change for a one-year trend, especially pre-pandemic when we didn't see these kinds of trends increase by more than a percentage or decline by more of a percentage generally. That was almost 10,000 fewer people admitted to prison from probation and parole systems, but there was huge variation. 13 states actually saw their violation numbers increase, while 26 states, twice as many, saw their violations decrease. That was all pre-pandemic. It feels like a century ago. And so we really wanted to know, and we've sent out a survey to you all. We know you're getting tons of surveys. We hope this is one that you can prioritize given the kind of utility it should have at a 50-state level to really look at what happened in 2020 and be able to get that information out publicly as soon as possible. But from the 35 states that have already provided data, thank you. We're seeing obviously huge reductions. Overall, there was a huge drop in new court commitments as courts shut down. You all know these facts in your states well, but in terms of the violation reductions, there were 105,000 fewer violation admissions, a 54% drop compared to 2019. And virtually every state saw decreases, right? Not surprising. But to Director Williams' point, and Director Presai's point, these are major reductions in what is a huge contributor to overall prison population dynamics. So I have to do the plug and ask we're still waiting on data from some of you, no, again, it could not be a busier time with legislatures in session. If you are one of these states and are able to make this a priority in the weeks ahead, we would be greatly appreciative so that we can present as close to a 50-state picture in terms of these trends, both 2018-19 as well as in 2020.
Hey, Marshall, can I jump in real quick?
Please.
One of the things that I've appreciated, and I think our members would appreciate too, is kind of taking a baby step approach as it relates to justice counts. As mentioned earlier, there are some agencies that are far more advanced with their research, teams or whatnot and technology than others. And it can be a little daunting, having been a director of a state that wasn't very advanced. It can be a little daunting to think, my gosh, I can't necessarily keep up with all these things that are, being asked of me. But one of the things that I'm excited about with Justice Counts, and this is a plug for it, and hopefully all of our members can get involved, is it seems crazy to me that like today, if someone wanted to know even approximately the inmate count across the United States, that's not anywhere. I mean, in order to really get a number, in some cases, it can take 12 months to register something like that. And, but at the same time, like every single one of our directors right now, if I ask them, could tell us what their inmate population is in their state, because it's so important, for a variety of reasons. And so when I think of like baby stepping our way to get where we want to go, I think like something like that would be just like an awesome first step. Can we as an association on a monthly basis, provide the people that are incarcerated across the United States, in our systems? And I just think as an association, that might be a pretty powerful thing for us to be able to show or demonstrate on a monthly basis. And then, from there, what else then can we look at? And with all of the kind of, guardrails around, not wanting to put something out there, frankly, that requires a lot of interpretation, may be embarrassing, those types of things. I mean, that would be an absolute mistake. That'd be the quickest path to failure if we were to do something like this on a national level. But it feels like there are some things that could be low-hanging fruit for us as an association to get involved in, and not create work for systems, just simply gather the information that our systems are already gathering on a monthly basis, and then we just compile it and put it out there on a monthly basis. So I know it just came to mind, and something I'm excited about as it relates to justice counts. And it's a plug for any member out there that currently isn't participating with that. I think it would be a great idea for us as an association to do these types of things.
Great, thanks so much, Kevin. And just responding to some of the comments in the chat, provided my contact information. If you didn't receive the email, or we can resend the email or send it to you directly to help gather that data, or make, as Kevin said, for Justice Counts, existing data available, and get more of that count in real time, please just reach out, and we'll be in touch immediately to help get that in place. All right. Exciting trends, interesting trends, worthy of continued look. I want to shift to the last project here with the 15 minutes remaining, and talk just about two ways that there's free assistance available. I think many of you know about these, but want to make sure with new directors on the line that there are free assistance thanks to the BJA, as well as other funders to assist your states in these kind of challenging and uncertain times. First, just some data, and eager to hear thoughts from you all about how this is playing out in your states, right? I think there's never been a time when there's been more uncertainty about where prison populations will go, given the huge reductions that have occurred as the impacts of the pandemic have been felt across the justice system. But when and how and to what degree those populations will return to pre-pandemic levels, what will that mean for staffing, for facilities, for budget needs from your agencies? Will we see populations continue to increase? Will they be some of the changes be maintained and populations be lower than they were pre-pandemic? All these are huge questions that our sense from talking to many of you are just now beginning to be asked. Everything right now is just focusing on getting through the next day or week, it seems. But as we look 1 to 2 years out, assessing how to manage this uncertainty seems to be a critical challenge that we're eager to find ways to be helpful to. When we look upstream in the criminal justice system, right, we look for indicators. None of this complete data, given the challenges we mentioned with justice counts, are trying to address. But what little data we have on crime and arrest trends from 2020, just looking at a report from the Council on Criminal Justice, and you have Thomas App talking to you all later today, who authored this report, right? But just looking at 34 cities across the country to get a sense of what's happening with crime trends, there's been increases in certain types of violent crime, although these base numbers are relatively historically low, and we're nowhere back to where we were in the 90s. There are troubling increases in this 1 year period in terms of homicides in particular. But the higher volume crimes that really drive the population trends in your criminal justice system, with property and drug offenses, saw significant reductions from 2019 to 2020. 30% drop in drug offenses, or drug arrests rather, 16% reported drop in reported larceny, 24% drop in reported residential burglary. And so big questions about whether these crime shifts will continue and to what extent they are a function of law enforcement shifting amid the pandemic versus broader actual changes in behavior that they are responding to. That's the very front end. And then we look a little bit closer upstream to jail populations. There's been increasing efforts to collect jail data from where it's publicly available. And we saw a huge drop early on in the pandemic, as you know, that's slowly been coming back, but this varies wildly by states. And if you've been looking at your state's jail trends, some states are all the way back to where they were pre-pandemic and have been for months. Others still remain significantly lower than pre-pandemic levels, as both intake in terms of arrests and court processing and pretrial policy changes have been maintained. And all of this, as you all know, from the few states that do report data monthly on prison populations, has led to just double-digit declines in nearly every state where we have data, from 10% reductions in Tennessee and Ohio to 20% reductions in California, Minnesota, Maine, Connecticut. And so again, huge reductions, but big question is, when will they bottom out? When will they start to increase as some of these trends upstream start to pick up again? So I want to flag just two efforts that we've been talking with many of you about, but are available for other states as well. The first is kind of an immediate short-term way to assess trends upstream and to try to tailor some policy options specifically around supervision success. This project is called Course Corrections and supported by Arnold Ventures and Pew. We're already working with Missouri, with South Carolina, with Colorado, with Illinois, and this project's really focused on supporting you as directors in assessing these trends and trying to find ways to lift up supervision success as a driver that policymakers can try to work now to strengthen and make sure it doesn't lead to big increases in violation behavior. The second, which I think most of you all know very well, is justice reinvestment, which is a highly intensive multi-year effort. This is the project of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and the Council of State Governments Justice Center is lucky enough to be one of 2 technical assistance providers, along with the Crime and Justice Institute, who have long provided support to dozens of states to really meet them where they're at, take a look at the data that they have and they don't have, and bring together stakeholders from across the system and all 3 branches to really understand what's driving population trends and develop a consensus for policy change and for reinvestment. And that the benefit of justice reinvestment is also provides, thanks to BJ, support for implementation, both in terms of staff capacity as well as ongoing data monitoring. On both these projects, we have more ability to help additional states. So if this is of interest to you and you're looking for more research analysis capacity, we are here and happy to talk with you about how either in the current moment or ahead of the 22 legislative session, we can work with you to be helpful. One of the tools that we developed with recidivism through the course corrections project is what we call the cost calculator. And the purpose here was really to help drive home this point that, supervision violations, either for a new crime or for technical reasons, are a big determinant of your prison admission trends, right? Given that they represent 45%. And so that, especially as we think about coming out of the pandemic, hopefully here with vaccination and other efforts in the months to come, revocations, which are now down 54%, will increase undoubtedly. And that will impact prison populations. And just how much they impact prison populations is hard to figure out. It's hard to just conceptualize. And so this tool was really intended to be something that you can use, that others can use to underscore to policymakers and the public the need to focus on supervision success, whether it means ensuring staff have the training and time and tools to apply evidence-based practices or to ensure that there's sufficient behavioral health treatment in your community. If those things are in place, we know we'll likely see violations and revocations rise, and there'll be a cost to states to do that. And so this was intended to give that kind of tool to you all in making that case. Particularly now, as we see revocations so low, we see them probably increasing. This is not meant to be a budget forecast tool, right? These are just to give a sense of the scale of cost and numbers impacted. I know some of you had questions and concerns about how we calculated costs, and I can just quickly let you know that we used a marginal cost rate, right? Just food and no staffing or fully loaded costs for any population changes under 1,000. But once a population change in this model got to more than 1,000, we did start using more fully loaded costs that you've given us in past surveys, because we figured at the point of 1,000 bed impact on your population, you might be in a position to make some decisions that might generate or more likely mirror fully loaded costs. But again, we're not intending this to be something we know, and we hope your legislators know that just because one part of your system changes and may yield some bed reduction doesn't mean that overall your bottom line budget changes, right? You've got other cost drivers that are oftentimes bigger movers and shakers than just your population trends. And so we hope it doesn't cause any consternation or concern on that front. But wanted to lift that up as an option. We can tailor this, we can update it based on your numbers if that's helpful. And we'll hopefully update it with 2020 numbers once those are in. PU has a policy framework of go-to policy options you can then take and tailor around supervision success. I think you all know about this report. Director Priestley sat on the advisory group of experts that surveyed what states have already done and could do to improve sanctions or improve supervision. And we're working with states like Missouri and others to take this data and to try to develop policy memos and other tools to help equip directors like you with the data to make the case to policymakers. Look, population is down here, If we return to pre-pandemic levels, the cost to the state would be this. If we're actually able to take the moment right now to invest in the kinds of services, supports, and supervision approaches that we know from the evidence can keep revocations and violation rates down, we can actually see the population not rise to those pre-pandemic levels and yield some savings long-term for the state. So this is kind of things we're eager to help you all put together through these efforts. And with that, I'll turn it back to Director Priest. I don't know if you want to talk about our work in Missouri or how you're putting this kind of data to use, but we hope it's useful. And if there's other ways we can be helping you make these arguments or make these cases with the data, we're happy to do so.
Yeah, Marshall, I mean, I would first of all just say a huge thank you to you and Laura and a lot of the folks on the CSG team. Really, we plan on using this 2-pager that CSG helped develop for us with our legislators to show them here are the initiatives that as we continue to sustain what we're doing, these are the initiatives we plan to do. And by doing that, expanding certain programs that are working and implementing some new ones, this is the cost avoidance we plan to get. So that's one visual that we're able to show them. You flip over to the cost calculator, and then you can show from there, they can understand a reduction in revocations from community supervision, which means we expand these programs we're working toward and get this type of outcome, can save this kind of money. Conceptually, people get it. And we were able to sell it for the first round of our JRI talks. Now people want to see more of what we're talking about. And so this is where these two, the cost calculator as well as this 2-pager, are really able to help us show if the population goes up, we can save a little bit. If the population stays where it is, we can save more there. So it's really about working with Marshall and his team to help figure out what is the story you want to tell. Because I also have to balance it against some of the naysayers in our state who are throwing barriers up against the problems with promoting success in the community. And so it's the barriers that we have to deal with. You all know what your own barriers are. You know what your story is. So I would just encourage you to work with the Council of State Governments, because this is like our 4th iteration of this 2-pager, but we finally got it to the point that there's nothing on here when it gets out to the public that we can't defend and say it's 100% correct. And here's where we're headed. And this is why we want to continue sustaining these programs and what it's going to get us in a savings for the state and where we reinvest. So I'm excited about it. I would encourage people to think about how the Council of State Government resource can help you tell your story through a dollars and cents model.
Thanks, Director, and thanks, Kevin, and to everyone for the opportunity to be with you. We look forward to continuing to work with you all as a group and individually on all these fronts. And again, thank you for all you're doing in these difficult times.
Great job, Marshall. Great job, everyone that participated in this session. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to very, very briefly, I'm just going to dovetail what Ann just said. You know, with whatever we do data-wise on a national level, if we don't create an opportunity to tell our own story, boy, it's a big time miss for us, big time. And I think about that, we get down the road and start to put things out there like, turnover rate and those types of things. It'll be another way for us to communicate to decision makers in our own states and our own systems about some of our needs, our resource needs. And so when they look at another state that has a very low turnover rate, it'll be a very natural thing for you to say, well, yeah, they pay their correctional officers X amount of dollars, they've got this, that, and the other. It might be a good way for us, again, to kind of tell our story, to communicate what our needs are in each and every state. And lastly, this session, and it was done, I think, by design, it fits perfectly within to our next session. And so we're going to talk about community corrections. And as you know, as mentioned earlier, the board talked about the 3 pillars, the 3 goals of 2021: leadership development, community corrections, and data. And we just highly encourage you each to come back in what would be 12:30 Eastern, so you can hear from Dr. Skinner and Josh Tewalt and Veronica Cunningham, who's the executive director of APPA. We've established a relationship with APPA that's going to be sustaining. It's going to be great for all of us. But all of you know that we can affect our inmate population in a significant way when we focus on community corrections, probation, and parole. If we can make some tweaks here and there, do some things in community corrections, it can have a big time impact on our prison population. And so we've gathered up 3 of these leaders. They're going to talk about some of the specific things that they're doing in their own systems to give suggestions to their colleagues across the United States. So with that, Marshall, again, great job. Thank you. Another plug for BJA and all that they do to help us move the needle. Thank you again, everyone. See you in just a bit.